Alexa Seda. Welcome to Speak Up St. Louis.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here today with you. I'm already feeling the vibe. I'm comfortable.
I know.
I'm just ready to talk to you.
Right. We've already done our pre-conversation shenanigans.
Yep. It felt like a nice pregame. So now
Yes.
I'm like ready to go.
You're going to do great. And this is, we're really excited to have you on, not just for the work that you're doing here in St. Louis, but you're also getting awarded next week as well, too, from the St. Louis Visionary Awards as an emerging artist. So congratulations to you as well.
Thank you so much. It's still kind of a shocker. I'm like, what?
What makes it a shock?
I think what makes it a shock is that I work in the artistic space. So I meet so many beautiful artists in St. Louis. Someone to see me, the one that's like behind the scenes, and I don't really take the stage all the time. And I did just I did put my art out there for like, the first time-ish last year is like I directed my own show, but I did have it co-written with somebody, but I did like a year-long initiative where I was collecting stories with the Latinx Arts Network about the different Latinos here in St. Louis. But why I did that, there's like so much more to it. So I think maybe that like led to being seen, because I mostly am behind the scenes. I'm like the producer or the admin or like putting the systems and structure together to my creative practice with my business partner.
Yeah. And all those things, the admins, the behind the scene work is what makes beautiful art. And so you are one of those. So when you talk about this idea of, the other beautiful artists, you are one of the other beautiful artists making work. And so congratulations to you for that.
Thank you.
That is no small thing. And so I just wanted to make space to acknowledge that because the St. Louis Visionary Awards is a great organization. And so to be able to have you on behalf of the upcoming reception for you and the class of honorees is awesome.
Thank you. It does feel awesome because I'm like, you know what, you're right. The reason why I do what I do is because I have a vision.
There it is.
So it like all makes sense to me now.
It's all coming together.
Yeah, it's all coming together.
And that's why you're here today too, is to be able to, because outside of just the award, you're doing the work here in St. Louis and a part of that cultural fabric. And we could just go ahead and dive into it. So if you want to let the folks know, some about who you are and what you do.
Okay. So a little bit about who I am is that I've been trying to define that a little bit because actually I was listening to a podcast one day that was talking about being a multi-passionate person. And I was like, you know what, that's what it is. I just like too many things. And I grew up and my mom was kind of like a jack of all trades. And I think in that anything that I learn or I grasp or I want to do is like I want to learn it to its utmost. So I think that's what drew me to disciplines like theater, like urban planning, like public health, because all three of those things require like looking at the big picture. Like there's so many things that make up public health, and there's so many things that make up planning in your environment that you have to consider all different facets, all different sections, all different subtopics in order to create that bigger vision picture. So like my planning expertise is what gives me like the understanding. Like I've always been interested in the built environment. I was always curious like how the built environment affected our health outcomes. I grew up in Chicago. In one neighborhood, I was in the northwest side of the city. Right. And it was a predominantly Puerto Rican neighborhood and Black, and it was Mexican too. And I lived like on a warring faction. So I lived on Kimball Avenue, and in between that, it was like I lived like on the Latin King side, and then across the street was like this, I think it was Spanish vice lords. No, Imperial gangsters, because I moved to a different neighborhood, so it was a different gang. But anyways, I used to be very attuned to like when my mom would drive us around in her Ford Tempo, because she was a single mom, and we would have fun just like visiting the local parks, that when we would cross different streets, you just seen the difference, but you also seen the difference in people. You saw them like, okay, like this side of town is white, or I'm going to use the term, and I don't know if it's probably not politically correct, but like yuppie. I remember hearing that term when I was a kid, yuppies. And so I was like fascinated by that. And I was fascinated by like, I know we're good people. Like, why are we faced with like these issues? Why am I already 9 years old and learning about the terms gentrification, and I'm like at the Board of Education, like I was chosen to speak up against some other organization at the time. They were like, oh, we want you to talk about not closing this school down, because they were going to close. It wasn't my school, but it was like, let's say like 4 blocks south of me. Actually, on the street that I lived, I just lived on this side, so I went to another school. But I just felt that like violence, but then hearing about like diabetes or like the chronic illnesses, I didn't have all of that terminology, which is how I landed in public health later. It's like I wanted to understand why people who looked like me, Black and Latino people, were faced with these like social ills and conditions. And also say the media partially plays a role in that. But that's how I started like the urban planning experience. But really I wanted to learn about like youth resiliency and public health, because that's what I was seeing. But for me, I saw that our environment, the physical, was kind of messing with how people were interacting with each other.
Yeah.
And then I went the public health route in terms of my schooling.
For sure. And I think that, to what you're saying as well, it's not new that not even just Black and brown folks, but folks that are in poverty, I feel like those are lessons that folks have to learn sooner than others in regards to what's, at least even from my personal experience of being a young Black man, is that, all right, understanding, all right, how does this space respond to you when you step into the room? Is this a comfortable space? Is this a safe space for you to be able to actually share your thoughts? And those are just some of the minimal things that I, think about. These aren't even some of the larger risks and things that you're talking about changing in between different neighborhoods, or even the ideas of even touching on some of the gang violence and other things that are potentially happening in some places and spaces as well, too. And that's just the surface of all the other traumas that we're talking about, without even necessarily calling them out. So I think there is that part of really being able to understand that, folks go through that, and that's not just in Chicago.
It's not
that's
just
in
Chicago.
many other places as well too. And so even connecting that to a health outcome is important. But I think what's also interesting, you said, it's like this idea of talking about the big picture. And it's interesting how you were talking about working in urban planning and then working in public health, and then the theater and the arts. And so I'm curious too, when you say looking at the big picture, there's the general idea of what that means, but like, what does that really mean for you? Like when you're looking at these things as a collection, or does looking at the big picture in certain ways look different for all the spaces? Or I'm curious on, are you using the same framework for this idea of the big picture in all 3 spaces?
I think I'm kind of using the same framework, but it's like I feel like what I'm doing is, as I've been like building myself, or like how I want to. So I guess like sometimes I don't know exactly what the big picture is, but to me, my big picture was always that I dreamed of like being able to co-create or create sustainable neighborhoods for Black and brown people. Specifically Black and brown, and I mean for all people, but it's because I'm half Black and half Puerto Rican, so those are like the identities that I hold true and dear to my heart, and how I grew up in the spaces that I was in. But as I've been doing the work, I feel like, like public health, I'm able to understand statistics, outcomes, like be able to label things, or the data piece.
Right.
While the planning aspect is like working with all different sectors of government and the things that like make a place, like working with them to understand like the cogs in the machine and how they all work, and like what engineers what. But I really feel like the artistic space is now like my tool and my weapon to be able to accomplish both the public health and the planning background. I feel like through my theater experiences has made me more of like a humble human, been able to empathize. But also theater, you are able to like teach and put a person in someone else's shoes. So it's like, I feel like my disciplines, I'm able to transcend like what's happening at the individual level and like carry it through like this system of individual, community, to macro, to like the policy level. So I'm able to like experience it all to like make it work, instead of all of those things are operating in like different
spaces. It's an intersectional practice.
Exactly. Intersecting it all to make it work.
And I think that's a really, fascinating skill, because a lot of folks can't go from the micro to the macro and back. For some folks, they're only in the macro, the details of it, save that for somebody else. Yeah. And there's some folks that are the doers of that work, but maybe not necessarily the lead in the vision overall. And I guess, so I'm curious on like, how do you balance, going from back and forth? Because at least for myself, I know what that feels like. And sometimes it can get a little overwhelming at times. And so how are you figuring out how, maybe not always necessarily how to do it, because it may not always be up to you, but when to do it as well.
Yeah. So when I do it is like when I'm in a meeting, let's say with more of the government type folks, I feel like I'm able to reel them back in and say like what's actually happening at the grassroots, at the bottom level. Because sometimes, like you said, if you're up here, there's like, I can't stand, and I know we do it because like we're not gonna talk to 1,000 community members necessarily, but I feel like I'm like a translator, and that's what I tell myself. It's like, what, I'm just translating, but I'm also like, I'm there. I'm like trying to figure out what I'm trying to say here. So sometimes it could be exhausting, but what I've noticed is like, I've done all of this is because I wanted to be the connector and the translator at the end of the day, or find people to translate the information. Because sometimes I'm like, okay, this policy is being made, but it doesn't really tap into what's going on. It's not going to change anything. But I feel like me being there, knowing that I can talk to a group or like gather intel or have the group shape or co-create a policy that actually makes sense for both parties, makes sense for government, but makes sense for the people that are living there every single day.
Right.
So that's how it's like how I kind of navigate and bounce between the two. Sometimes it's hard creatively, because then I feel like I put the conditions of perfectionism, and it's not that no one's asking me to do that, but when it comes to the academia way of doing things, like, or government, like the structure and the bureaucracy, I feel like that does impede on my creative side. That I don't always feel like I could be I myself put these conditions on how I want to do my work, because I'm so used to doing that in the other space. Or sometimes I feel like I might be limited creatively in a work setting, because it won't be accepted or adopted, or it's like too much for people.
Right.
So I like to be in places where they are okay with my creativeness, that I can be all of that and not feel like I have to like shuck and jive.
You don't have to fit a box, or you have to fit a mold that fits, what this institution is used to on a traditional basis.
Yep. Like I want to be expressive. I want to have fun PowerPoints. I want to, like, if I'm talking to a planning commission, I want to be like, la da da, like performative.
Right.
Because that's like now the theater background.
The improv of it all as well too.
Yep. But then sometimes I'm like, I tell myself the other way. I'm like, maybe I've been too strict on some artistry, or like wanting things to go like this, or flexibility, because like project managing.
Yeah.
When I'm like, when it comes to the creative process, you just got to let it flow with some folks. But when you're getting a project done, like a show, you need my planning background to like keep it on track.
Right. Because deadlines are important.
Exactly.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah. And I definitely resonate with what you're talking about, because for myself being in nonprofit leadership, what I've found is, especially over these last several months, when I'm in my studio trying to make, there's a lot of times where I'll have these moments where it will be, I'm almost limiting myself. And a part of that is, I think, and it's not necessarily that work is limiting, but I think work itself, sometimes there's not the space to be able, like, A plus B sometimes, or most of the time, has to be C. Like there is no, there is no other answer to it. And so what I've found in my studio practice is that there have been moments to where it's like, oh, I'm going to do this type of work, or I'm going to try to make this decision. And sometimes I hesitate on it. And I have to remind myself, I'm like, Q, you have you have to walk out into this world and hesitate on a lot of other things in life. This is the one place where you should not have to hesitate, because it's you and you. And so I really resonate with what you're saying, because I have to take myself out of that mindset as well too, of like, no, I'm going to make this decision because I want to make this decision. And it's empowering for me to work through my process, rather than always having to conform to a process of, oh, that's not a great idea, so we're not going to do it. And so I've been in the process more of, even if I don't think it's the idea, you know, being able to do it anyway, because it's still taking a step. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because that's a real feeling, probably for a lot of creatives out there that are trying to navigate their personal creativity and their expression, but don't necessarily know how to express that in spaces that are not traditionally creative or innovative in that way. So,
yeah. You know, you had me thinking, I'm like, I've gotten to a point where I don't want to feel, see, there I go saying, I don't want to feel this way. You know what? It's okay to feel this way. I don't want to care. I just don't want to care about conforming or anything like that. Like, that's what I've been working through. It's like, it's okay to be you. It's okay to be wrong, or to put your own foot in your mouth if it's not a great idea, but just pitch it, just put it out there. That's where I'm at. I'm always like trying to be cautious. I'm like, where did that come from? And I feel like the cautiousness does come from being trained through these schools that tell you need to do it this way, you need to have cultural competency and yada yada. I'm like, you know what, that SHI stuff don't work sometimes, the cultural competency aspect.
But also, that's it's not even just from schools, how society has told Black and brown folks to navigate through the spaces as well too.
Oh my God, yes.
But also,
that
like,
part.
how even sometimes our parents, relatives, and other folks that look like us have told us to navigate these spaces as well too, because of past traumas as well too. So I don't think it's you just want to navigate that through that way because you just want to. Nobody wants to have to think twice when they leave the house, but we do have to, because there's the realities of what is up against us when we step out of those doors. We don't have to step out of our doors sometimes for that reality to be in our face. And so I guess my question, to kind of more so even add some more definition about it, because we've talked about this some on some of our earlier podcasts around some episodes around mental health and things. And I think some of the things I was talking about in regards to anxiety and trauma could very much be seen from a mental health standpoint. And I feel like that's something that might actually be missed more often than not within public health sometimes. I'm not in the spaces and conversations all the time, but a lot of it is, like, a lot of what we talk about sometimes is infrastructure. And do we have the right development? Do we have the right system in place? But are we thinking, but from your perspective and what we're seeing from the public health standpoint, when we're thinking about urban planning, are we thinking about those things in regards to mental health and trauma and all those things, and how what we're building also informs those things as well too?
I think it's subtly there. But I don't think it's always brought to the forefront where let's really talk about it, so then it really impacts design. I think in the spaces that I'm in, I'm finding that it's like almost natural. Like, oh, urban design, you are thinking about those concepts. But I think the piece that is missing, and you're finding like new wave thoughts, like there's new urbanism. You'll find like there's pockets around the U.S. where there's styles. But in terms of like Black and brown folks, I'm like, I wonder how many of us are in these professions, because I think we do have to cater and adapt to the style. Because I'm like thinking about our DNA, and I'm thinking about like, let's go way back and let's think about how did they build things on the African continent and South America, and how do we incorporate those elements into like this American Eurocentric design? Because like maybe, like, I sometimes do think that was like the way things are built are not built for, and again, anxiety's for everyone, but I do think about Black and brown folks, and the spaces that are created for us don't really feel like they are for us, or they considered like our cultural background. And maybe how, like, I'll be honest, people in St. Louis, we love our red brick. It's famous across the US, but like for me, I'm like, I can't see so much red. Like, it actually affects me. That when I walk my neighborhood, I like to walk blocks where I'm like, some people painted their brick. So there might be a blue house, a yellow house, and there's like foliage, like people have flowers. But then there's some blocks in my neighborhood where it's just dead and red. And that immediately like saps the energy out of me.
I've never considered the red brick of St. Louis from that perspective at all, because it's such a it's such a traditional thing. It's in St. Louis, anytime the conversation comes around the the early architecture of the city, that's considered in high regard. A lot of some of the most expensive houses that are here in St. Louis City are red brick. And so there is there's some level of high value to that. But that always is interesting to me in regards to even what you're talking about in relationship to material, whereas in some neighborhoods, red brick is of a high value commodity that's used for generally more expensive houses, quote unquote. But then in other parts of our area, we have dilapidated buildings that are also red brick as well too, that are not seen in the same level of value, or will be extracted to be able to go make the other high value
exactly.
house. And so it's just really interesting that I even getting down to what you're talking about in regards to public health and urban planning, the use of material is critical to change the narrative of spaces and places for folks to be able to use them and to make it accessible to folks, and to also change narratives and conversations on how we perceive spaces as well too.
Yeah, because everything's like square. Well, I live on the south side of St. Louis, and as I'm driving around, like everything's square and red. Like, where are the triangle shapes? Where are there some domes? And maybe not everyone feels this way, but then I start thinking as I'm driving home, like, what if I could just ask like 100 people in South City and 100 people in North City, like how they would actually want their streets designed or their homes or painted. Yeah. I don't know, I think we're like a colorful, vibrant, like it's in our culture, it's in our DNA, but we don't paint like another thing. I go to other cities, and what makes them like shiny and new is like they have more glass embedded into their downtowns. Ours is historic and old, but again, you like come in and to me, I love you, St. Louis. Downtown just does not have that look. You go to Chicago, you see the skyscrapers against Lake Michigan. You go to Minneapolis, their buildings like all have like LEED certification, meaning like they consider sustainability in their practices. It's just a different look. Or like Nashville, like they had pretty skyscrapers. So it just makes me think of our city and how we are so creative and artistic. I'm like, why don't I see like more painting and murals everywhere? Yeah. On our buildings. For sure. Even in downtown, like you'll see downtowns in other cities and they have like a lot of splash of color throughout their megalith of buildings, that it just adds like depth. And then you see people like taking photos and being comfortable. And I'm sure we have like a couple of murals, but we have like big square box buildings downtown that have no color. Right. Yeah, and I think of different mural areas, at least here in St. Louis. I think of down off Wash Ave near Grand, what they're doing, what the Kranzberg Art Foundation is doing, which is really great. I know there's some, we have them down on the riverfront because we have the big mural time as well too. One of my favorite places to go. Yes, and we have some different pockets here and there outside of different businesses, but I get what you're saying. What's the connectivity to it all? And how to be able to build that up more, because you definitely see it, at least when I think of cities like even Phoenix, they have a pretty strong murals there. El Paso definitely has a lot of strong murals. Like you can't walk a block without seeing a mural, which is really beautiful as well. And so, but I think what also is, and with this idea of murals too, it like when you go to those different cities, they tell a story of this place. And I think that's something that we have to continue to find new ways of doing as St. Louis. I think there's a habit of just leaning on the tradition of St. Louis is what it always has been. Whereas I think being able to tell the new story of what St. Louis is and where we're going, I think it's happening in different spaces and places. But what elevates it to that next level to be like, it tells everybody that, St. Louis is doing something new. We're the gateway to the West.
Enough said.
No, exactly.
Show me state. Exactly. And we got to show folks. And that's not just an external thing, because I don't think it's, and this is maybe just me as a resident of St. Louis, I'm not looking for any other city or somebody to validate what's happening here, because I know it's happening here. we're having this conversation because it's happening here. But I do think that, to have a part of that, that larger conversation, not necessarily just for the glitz and the glam, but to be able to really be able to show folks, hey, this is what we're doing, and we're not just doing it to show off, but we're doing it because we're proud of what's happening here.
I love that you said that, because that's something that I brought into the planning space. So I didn't start off as a planner first. I started off as like mostly in community development. That's how I really got entrenched, and I stayed here versus like moving back home to Chicago or to the East Coast, where I thought I was going to work for like the CDC, working on chronic diseases or something.
We're glad you stayed here.
Thank you. But is that we don't need others to validate ourselves. There is a lot of great stuff happening here, but also like I feel like I bring that perspective to even like city government. I'm like, we're here trying to like fix all these problems, but I'm like, there's so much ingenuity happening in the streets that I'm like, honestly, we could like, and this probably sounds contradictory because I work in government. There's so many wonderful folks and entrepreneurs and artists in St. Louis. I feel like if we are given the tools, we could do more, we can say more, we can like make government, we can make it more interesting.
Yeah.
Like really for the people and really celebratory.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's contradictory because I think a part of it is that, I mean, there's no government without the folks to be able to govern. And I think, to not have the interest of what the people are wanting to do and excited about, we miss out on those opportunities, not necessarily for us to change as not just as a city, but also to uplift others and empower others to help to make the change as well, too, because the idea that, and this is just my personal way, I don't think any government by itself can do that. Like it takes both the government and the community working hand in hand to be able to even get close to that idea of this collective vision that I think that we're talking about. So yeah, I don't think it's contradictory. I think it's hand in hand for sure.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Something that we talk about in the planning department, which is why I stick around, is the middle out approach. Instead of like grassroots up, top down, is that there's actually like that mutual beneficial relationship there, that it does take both.
Because both need each other, I mean, there's a lot of conversation about just throw the government out, but it's like, but
you, my lovely people, if you come join me, so I'm not by myself,
right?
And we can actually.
So to let folks know that there are community-oriented individuals in government, because I think there's that larger media perception of like, oh, the government's doing its thing. It does, there's nobody that represents me in those spaces when that's actually not the case.
It's not the case, or you can be that person that starts it. So it's not just me, it's not just like my colleague. It's a whole bunch of. This is my shameless plug. I think we need more artists in city government. Just saying.
Say it.
Or more of our creative folks.
As
we're
Michelle,
doing some awesome things, awesome programming that the city needs, like that way of thinking, that innovative way of thinking and seeing itself.
Seeing things that we haven't, seeing St. Louis in ways that we haven't viewed it before. And I think that's important. And so to kind of shift gears in that sense, of seeing St. Louis in ways that it hasn't been before. You've talked some about some of the public health and some of the urban design part, but there's also this large area of arts and theater that you're also very passionate about. How did you get into that? Because it's like, you have a very much a technical skill set to what you do, but then you have the larger creative aspect that's flourishing as well too. Like, how did you even get into doing those parts of, like, have those always been a part of your life from an early age, or was it something to where you came to St. Louis and you were just like, you started getting connected? What's that story?
I would say it's more that I came to St. Louis and I started getting connected, but I always had like a creative bone in my body. I just thought that in order to affect policy, which I didn't know at the time was like policy related, that I had to be more technical, that I had to learn how to either engineer something or how to do like things mathematically.
Right.
Like, oh, that's how I'm going to affect the health
Right.
outcome.
It was the perceived notion
Yeah,
that
the perceived.
that oh, the mathematic and engineering, though those are
Like
valuable,
those-
that was the only
that like
route.
more like the scientific way of doing things.
Right.
But since I was a child, like actually, I'm gonna give you a whole story here.
Ooh,
of, like-
flashback moment.
yeah, flashback.
We all look
Yep.
up to the corner for this flashback.
When I was like 9, around that age, I joined, or I think my mom joined, this group called Blocks Together. So this is kind of bringing back to what I said earlier and like learning about gentrification, all these terminologies at a young age when I was in Chicago. And knowing that like what it meant to be like, oh, we're being priced out of our neighborhood, so we gotta move. Met these lovely humans, and I still remember their names to this day, even though it's been more than 20 years ago. And I think they were all artists themselves. Like when I think back, it was like these were artists themselves that were part of like this grassroots organization called Blocks Together. I don't know if it still has the same name, but they're like fighting issues or advocacy group. But one of the ladies took me to like a theater collective. I don't know if it was called a theater collective at the time, but they still exist. I just looked them up. I'm like, that's so cool. And it was called Bate Urbano, which I forget exactly what that means. It's like a urban, I forgot what Bate, it's slipping my mind. But anyways, she took me to this event, and I'm like 9 or 10, and I'm like, wow, look at all these artists. They were like beatboxing. It was all like some performative function. But I remember being there, and I think it was a spoken word artist came up and started talking about, like, did a piece on the sterilization of Puerto Rican women. And I was like, whoa. So ever since then, it's like it made an impression on me that art can like talk about social issues, or like we can have discourse about it. So I always kept that on the back of my mind. And I think that's what like influences, it does influence my work today, and like what I choose to do creatively.
Right.
But I loved music as a kid. I did different like dancing, but I was in the Chicago public schools. They always took art first or music class. And I don't think I saw that many like after school programs like the way I'd see here in St. Louis. I'm like, this is awesome. Like, oh my God, if I grew up at the time that there's like 1,000, like the museums having things to do, like how accessible arts is actually here in St. Louis. That's what I love about this place. As a kid growing up in Chi-Town, that was missing. Like it was like a part of the fabric, but in terms of its accessibility, and I think that's also what happened. Anytime like I got super excited, it was a short program. It was 2 weeks, or it was no more music for the rest of the year. So I feel like I conditioned myself that I had to go the technical route,
Right.
because they always took anything creative away. Then it was
First.
PE.
Dang, not the physical education.
Yeah, yes, that's all. Like I remember that, and I remember that feeling.
That's
I had
what
that
kids
as, like,
dream about
yeah.
in school. I mean, maybe I hope they still do, but as a kid, that's.
But it was
PE
like
it.
I just remember that gnawing, daunting feeling of when they did take. They're like, dang, the one thing that was like fun. But anyways, I always would like in high school. I dabbled in it, but when I got to St. Louis, it was actually my partner. He's the thespian. And I slid like right into all of the work. I met him at Roosevelt High School in our classes, and I saw what he was doing creatively. He was basically like doing like drama education in our class. And I'm just like, what are you doing? What is this? And I saw the effect that it had on our students and how we had to pivot our model of what we were supposed to be teaching to our kids. And I found that his drama approach was way more influential than anything else we were doing. And I like caught on, and then it was also influential for me. Like I feel like being involved in theater and being put on the stage and doing like all of the different roles, from producing to stage managing to acting, to creating to writing. It's been a joy. I definitely lost my train of thought there. But that's how I got involved about 6-7 years ago. Was first like just seeing it in the classroom, but seeing how just to kind of like connect the two. it taught me that I'm like, you know what, this is the approach I want to take with public health. Is that if I can teach you how to eat better, how to feel better about yourself, then we can connect, circling back to, I feel like some of our health issues or public health outcomes is also because we are disconnected.
Yeah.
And I feel like if we were more connected, then socially we would feel more like the self-efficacy or capacity to like make healthier choices.
Yeah.
And not engage in a whole bunch of like risky behaviors. There goes my public health talk.
No, you're good. One, I think, so the one thing that really stood out to me about what you said is, one, the fact that the amazing impact that art education can have on individuals in their learning. I just started taking a dance class last week.
Nice.
And the teacher told me that this is essentially, you taking this dance class is not necessarily about me teaching you the steps, and it is, but it's more so about you learning more and becoming confident with yourself. And I think that is something that is overlooked a lot of times with art when they take that away. You're taking away the opportunity for this deeper dive into the interpersonal, into the way you're thinking, into the way that you're seeing the world around you. And you're giving this rigid structure, like, unfortunately, math can be creative, so I'm not knocking the folks that love their math and science. You all are creatives in your own ways, and I appreciate you. But when you're thinking about some of the rigidness of that, especially at least how it's taught in school, 1 + 2 is 3. There's no, it has to be the right answer, and wrong is wrong. And I think a part of when you start, even what you were saying too about living in Chicago, when you start stripping those things away, and it's only you have to give the right answer. There is no space for exploration. There is no space for finding more of your self-identity. You lose something within the process of that development. And so that really resonates with me around just that process of how important that is for art to be a central focus on how we teach. And but that's not new though. I mean, just even if you look at some of the earlier ideas of what art was, some of it is oral storytelling. And that's just as important into the cultural, the memorization, the cultural fabric, self-identification, all these different things that cultures have held valuable for a long period of time. They're still be using it today, just in different ways. But yeah, art has a core part of who we are as people. And then the other thing that really stood out to me is because one of the things we're trying to do around food and with the work that I do with the Metro Market is I've been challenging our thoughts around nutrition education in regards to, it might not necessarily be that I'm telling you what you need to eat, but it's more of how do I shift this from nutrition education to a nutrition sharing, to where it's you have just as much knowledge about the food, because some folks in our communities have been cooking for decades and they cook real good too. But a part of it is how can I be in a sharing conversation with you to where, yeah, I want to have that level of influence on you at some point, sure. But it's more about the relationship and the trust building before I ever get to a point to where I can recommend something to you. And so how can I be in more community with you and ultimately hopefully being in more community and relationship with you allows for some of those natural things to happen in regards to influence and change and impact as well too.
And I like that you say I feel like I'm like the piece right before that. It's like the drama education part or teaching is like breaking down those facades. So that then you can have that trust and that building relations. Like once you're comfortable with yourself, then you can accept things, or you have awareness, or you could develop boundaries, whatever you need. But I think that sometimes we don't even know ourselves anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to do or see with our drama education component within our theater is developing that piece. So then we always talk about if we can do that, then we could teach someone how to do math. We could teach someone how to eat healthy. We can build that relationship. But also the art of genius, putting the idea in someone's head and thinking you did it, but they think they had the idea.
And real quick, just for folks that are listening, when you're talking about the theater and where all this is happening, just you want to shout out the folks, you and the folks that are, just so that folks, if they want to look more into it, they can connect.
If you want to connect theater-wise, please visit EncoreSTL. If you've known us for the last 10 years, we were originally Encore Theater Group, and then during the pandemic, we pivoted and we named ourselves EncoreSTL because we started doing digital productions as well. We are located in South St. Louis on the corner of Jefferson and Potomac in the Gravois Park neighborhood. We're part of the Cherokee Street Community Improvement District. And check us out online at EncoreSTL.org and see all the awesome things we got going on. We have Sacred Sunday. Shout out to the Sacred Sunday crew where they come in and they do yoga, hypnotherapy, sound bowls. And it is like basically free to the communities. Like come drop in and talking about like anxiety and stuff. I feel like that's the group to come to and like release that.
Yeah.
And come in and just in a safe space be able to like work through those things. And those are all artists. And we have healthy food there. So it's not like let's have vodka now and drinks. It's like we're eating chia pudding and celery.
Ain't nothing wrong with that a little bit every now and then, not every day.
So it's Sunday, but we work with a lot of great folks doing a lot of good for the community.
That's so cool. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that, folks were connecting the conversation to that because we want folks to be able to follow the work that you and your partner and other folks are doing to make those things happen. I also wanted to touch some on just some of the, I know it's Latin Art Network, as well as I think there was another group that you were talking about, because I'm really curious on when we're talking about the story of St. Louis, at least me personally, I feel like the story and the history of Latin folks in St. Louis is not told enough.
Yeah.
Not on a high level. I think we talk about, I think we talk pretty well, at least as St. Louis as a whole, about the Black history, the larger concept of how it came together. But I don't feel like there's a lot of, really a big attention to the Latin culture, Latin American culture that's happening right here in St. Louis that is thriving and flourishing. And a lot of us are utilizing in different ways. For some folks, it's food generally, for some people's baseline kind of thing. But it's also more than businesses. It's also that's a part of the culture and the history of this place as well, too.
Latinx Arts Network.
Yeah.
Been a part of that since 2017, and it's been like a great group to go to. It's open to anyone, so also plug out to them if you're interested in Latin culture. It's like a great group to go to where it's very open, it's inviting, and it's not like, oh, you're not Hispanic, so you're not supposed to be here. It's not like that at all. It's just more like a celebration of the culture. And the whole point is advocacy of the culture and be able to say, hey, we're here in a creative way. In terms of the history, I actually didn't know, because I'm used to St. Louis being such a black or white city. Like I've heard of like the waves, like I meet like my elders in the community who they're like, I've been here for like 30 years. And I'm like, what? You've been here for 30 years? Like you've been part of St. Louis? They're like, yes, I've had a business, or I remember this store. Like they're just as much as part of like the conversations that I'm hearing about, like, remember when Woolworths was here, or this was what Cherokee looked like, or this was what the Wellston Loop was. And actually the impetus for the project that I worked on with the Latinx Arts Network, which was Quinton, we like launched the project like September of 2022 and concluded November 2023. And that's the one I was saying earlier, that we collected stories from like the different Latino folks in St. Louis. Like we just wanted them to sign up, sign up, tell us your story. Some of the folks we had to like help them with it because they're like, how do I do this? Like, how do I get on the mic or record something? And I don't remember the gentleman's name right now, but I want to say it was like earlier in the pandemic. The Latinx Arts Network meet at the last Wednesdays of the month, and they always have a guest speaker. And he was talking about like Mexican history and how there were already Mexican folks. And I'm like kind of butchering it because I don't remember everything, but I just remembering him saying that Mexican folks have been here since like the 18th century. That they were already here, like they had families here, that they were working here. Not surprising, but you know, for me, being from Chicago and thinking like, oh, the Hispanic community here is small, or like historically they migrated to Chicago, to Kansas City, to like a New York or LA. It actually blew my mind at the moment that like St. Louis has that Latin history. It's just not out there like that.
Right.
So then me and a colleague were like, well, let's get, she wanted to do stories, and I'm like, I've been wanting to do a play related to the Latin experience. Because my whole, talking about like the creative part of me, my whole mission, I feel like, besides like my planning and designing and like wanting to manipulate our public spaces, is that I am on a mission. This is my vision for more Black and brown folks to like talk and intermingle with each other. That is not that separate. We don't have to be separated by cultural or by language, that there's actually like a lot of similarities. But we'll find like historically through like colonialism, but also then being in the American context, that history that we have is so pervasive. So growing up in Chicago, I experienced like more microaggressions within the Hispanic community that I have like here in St. Louis. Just because of, like in St. Louis, I've actually been called white, and I was like, well, what? I've never heard that I was a white person in my life. Being in Chicago, like, it was just a bigger community that you can identify, like, oh, you're Puerto Rican, or you look like you're Dominican. But here was called white, and I'm like, oh, that's fine, that's okay. I'm like, actually, I'm not. But I talked to folks about, like, yeah, in Chicago, I used to be made fun of my nose. They're like, you look African, you look this, or you look that. Like, being taught to hate my Blackness. Or like my African or my African American ancestry. And so how that dynamic or that like racism and that colorism exists in a lot of these spaces, and that's why I come to the table to talk about that's like, we're more alike, we're more adopting these ideologies about people. Let's talk about, you have African ancestry in your lineage, like quit playing. It's like when we come in America, it's like, well, we don't want to, I'm not going to get into all that, but it's like it's everywhere. But I'm like, if our communities talked more, I feel like that would also help with safety. Something, I'm like, I live off Cherokee Street, and my favorite aspect is when I see like a young Black kid talking to like the 40-year-old Mexican. Instead of like, ooh, I don't want to talk to them. Like, sometimes I see more fear, like, estos negros or something like that. Like, I've been told that. They're like, you live in a house of Black people? I'm just like, you butthead. But it's because that
was
exists.
A very gentle way of saying
it was gentle way, but I'm like, you're actually darker than my partner, bruh. Like, what are you talking about? But anyways, I love seeing when all folks get together and having a good time, like Cinco de Mayo on Cherokee Street.
Yeah.
When everyone's like vibing, having a good time, and like those identities get blurred and we're just all part of a larger community.
Because you're sharing in a cultural and more human experience. And I think that it's really great that you are taking the time to be able to archive, and not just archive stories, because I think that is just the idea of, I'm just housing these stories for myself and putting them up on a shelf. But that you're also taking the time to listen to other folks, not just their backgrounds and where maybe they're potentially coming from, whether it's coming from one country to this state, or coming from one neighborhood to the next, because both of those realities are true, and both of those experiences are just as valid when we're thinking about what makes St. Louis. And so it's really great to be able to hear that those things are happening. Because I think it was just really that idea of that there's so much happening here in St. Louis. And to your point, I like how you're really connecting this idea of community, communication, and relationships in regards to public safety and public health as well, too. Because the more that you know your neighbors, the more that you know the folks that are in your community, the better relationship that you can be, the better. I mean, I can hear my grandma and parents right now. Oh, we were, everybody was watching us. I can hear my grandma especially too of like, sister such and such was watching out for us, and she would tell our mom we got to, just like the whole thing. And so, but that collective kind of nurturing is something that I think we've I would say definitely to an extent, at least. And I'll just speak for St. Louis because I can't speak for everywhere, but at least here within St. Louis in certain places and spaces, we've lost that kind of culture of, it takes all of us. Like it's not one person lifting everybody up. It takes all of us to lift everybody up.
Exactly. It is all of us. And I'm like, the tool is maybe we got to bring and build those spaces, but also bring the programming aspect.
Yeah.
So that's where like I try to all fit that in together into how I navigate each of the spaces that I'm in.
Right. Because even with the metro market, sometimes what I found, like when people are coming to shop on the bus, one of the things that I've noticed is that folks will come onto the bus to shop, and we already know food is fellowship. And what happens is, somebody will get to talking about something, and somebody else will look over and they'll start chatting. And I've had examples of, for instance, folks finding out they were next door neighbors or a couple of houses down and never spoken to each other, didn't even know. And now they've built this, they built in this moment around food, not even just around food, but around fellowship.
Around fellowship, yeah.
They've built a new relationship. So now, hopefully when they see each other, they'll wave, they'll smile, and how much that just makes the day itself go better, like seeing folks smiling, seeing folks waving and acknowledging one another in the space. Because I would assume a part of that public health is a level, and we all experienced in some way, shape, or form during the pandemic, is a level of isolation. If I don't feel connected to the group of people that I'm living around or experiencing life with, then that also, I would imagine, probably begins to deteriorate your mental health and overall health as a whole too. So it's a multi-layered approach, and I appreciate how you are viewing the arts and creativity in a multitude of different ways to be able to come up with solution-based approaches. So whenever you put the get together, give me a call. I'm there. Especially if it's food, I'm really there.
I mean,
hold on. Now I can't. What's the menu? What's on the menu for this get together? What's some of your favorites? Like when you're getting together with your family and friends, what are some top tier things that has got to be there? I need to know.
Okay.
I'm a little hungry right now too.
Me too. I was thinking about
I'm getting some food after this.
I need chicken wings. I freaking love chicken wings. Some fried tilapia. Some Puerto Rican rice. Some potato salad. But the savory kind. I don't like sweet.
Okay, I gave you a little side eye with that potato salad now.
This like savory. I need my daddy's greens.
Ooh.
I like my dad's greens.
Greens for folks, especially for our seniors, man. That's a real. Those are real cooking terms, right? They'll be like, they're gonna ask you how you make them. And everybody does them.
I don't even make them myself. I'm like, I'll just travel all the way to Virginia to get my greens. Or here, if I find. Do you have a recommendation on who to get greens from here?
I mean, I don't eat nobody else's green, but my grandma's green. That's just standing on business. Like I feel like. See, now we're getting into a side, but that's just the same thing with like. When our family gets together, because a lot of my grandparents' siblings are from Mississippi, but now they live all different parts of the country. Yep. And so when we all get together, it's one of those things, and you probably experienced it too, like one person needs to bring the macaroni and cheese. Don't bring two different types.
I forgot about
macaroni and cheese. You are asking for drama, and don't put your name on who made it. Like these are foundational roles, like. Because what's going to happen is once they find out who it is, it's going to be, oh, my grandma makes it this way. Now you got everybody talking about how their grandma make the macaroni and cheese because you're used and conditioned to a certain way of those things being made.
Yep.
And so when you're trying something new, it's like, no, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about my parents and the greens. Like, is Nana going to cook them? Is my dad going to cook them? Or who's going to make the cherry yum yum?
Whoa. What's the cherry yum yum?
It's really just like Cool Whip and like cherries in it or something. My Nana makes it. She just makes a whole bunch of pies.
No crust? It's got a crust to it, right?
It has crust.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
It has crust.
That
But now
good.
she's in charge of that. My dad's in charge of greens. And my auntie makes all of the baked goods. And now I'm like, I might fly home
right,
and be like, I'm coming home. Somebody
right,
make me dinner.
Right. Alexa didn't go to the veterinary. Where's she at?
Right.
At home eating greens.
At home eating greens. And then I'll go to Chicago to my mom's house and get I just love her white rice. It is just plain white rice, but it has it's the perfect texture, perfectly salted, perfectly oiled. And she makes really good steak.
That's what I was gonna ask. What's with the white rice? Something's got to be good with that steak.
The steak, and she's been known my whole life for being a good cook. And at her job, she would cook in the break room, the kitchen, bring her crock pot, bring the air fryer now, do all sorts of stuff, or really know how to use the microwave. She was making stuff.
Right. But I think that's really but even those moments right there, being able to connect a food to an experience, to those things matter. And so what happens when you start having those shared experiences with other folks that may or may not look like you, may or may not have the same background as you, but you're all living in the same area in the city. Right. So now you start getting introduced to new things that you ain't never had before. So I'm I like those ideas of, and maybe this is just the much more creative, abstract way of talking about it, because I know there's a much more detailed way as well. But I like those ideas around how we can have better public health in St. Louis, around how we can, how do we create more communal experiences to improve public health, rather than maybe necessarily here's all the data, because there's the big data part of it, but it's if I'm really intentional about how I curate and create these moments for folks to come together, to some level of consistency. How does that begin to create new, maybe not new outcomes, but better or improved outcomes over time, just by being in community? No other, hey, here's a survey, or we're going to do a data test. We're just here to be in community, and that's it.
And that's what we do at EncoreSTL.
Boom.
We're in community.
Yeah, so I appreciate the insight that you're given to how all these things come together to be able to connect, just to be able to navigate a government entity space, the public health and urban planning, so the technicality of how you do that, as well as the art, and then being able to find a space, essentially, to bring all those, maybe not necessarily all of those different interests and focus areas together all the time, but being able to find the skill set that intersects all of the areas. And so, continue to do that work, continue to share these stories as you always have. And I look forward to seeing how not only EncoreSTL is beginning to just continue. You said 10 years, right? Wow. So you a decade into this thing, but also how you all continue to share those stories. Because for us here at Speak Up St. Louis, that's what we were thinking about, is how do we provide a platform to be able to tell this more authentic story of St. Louis through the voices and the folks that make it happen. And so it's really great to have you on. But before I let you go, I gotta ask you the question that we ask all of our guests. It's a 2-part question. And the first part is, what do you love most about St. Louis? And the second part is, what do you most want to see change?
What I love most about St. Louis is multiple things, but what I love most is being able to have a big town feel in a small town. What I love, actually, let me backtrack. I love the sense of grassroots community here. Even though I was talking earlier about the disconnection, but in the places where you find it, I just love the raw and the realness of when community does get together. And I love that approach of there's just so many people that I've met. like that entrepreneurial spirit is what I love. It's like, let's do something about it. Attitude is what I love. And I feel like being a transplant here, coming from a big city, I just sometimes would feel like lost in the sauce. Like I was just one person in 3 million people. But here I feel like really connected to my Southside community. And what I love is that being able to take my child with me places. I'm like, and people knowing his name, or like, oh, there goes our honorary board member, or I'm pushing him in the wagon as people are saying hello. Like that's so important to me that my son now has a community.
Yeah.
And so bringing back that's part of the goal too. It's like eyes on the street, that connection with your neighbors, which therefore I feel like will create like healthier beings and lives, and that connection that I hope for all Black and brown folks in St. Louis. And what I don't like, right?
Yeah. What do you?
Or not what I don't like.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it turns into that. What do you most want to see change?
And on the other side of that token, what I do want to see changed is the silos, or like the clickiness, because it is a small town. It does feel like high school. Or like if you're a transplant, it's like, where do you fit in?
Well, I think all the work that you are doing is beginning to break down some of those walls in a number of different places.
That's the goal.
So I look forward to seeing how you continue to involve and develop that work. And I also look forward to seeing how you are making space for yourself. Take care of yourself, because you and the folks that you're working with in the communities, but have so much to give to make St. Louis even more than what it is now, or more than what we can maybe necessarily envision it to be. And so making that time to take care of not only ourselves but one another is super important. And I think the work that you're doing is refreshing. It's regenerative, and it's because it's storytelling. It's about who we are. So continue to do great work, Alexa. And once again, congratulations on your award from the St. Louis Visionary Awards as an emerging artist. It's a big deal. And so, thanks so much for being on.
Thank you for having me on. I really enjoy this conversation.